It has been weeks of fighting in this Emperor-cursed land. Blood and rain have turned the fighting trenches into pits of churned mud full of viscera and limbs sticking out at odd angles. Broken bodies are strewn about, dotting the landscape. Some are skewered on long makeshift spears. They are clustered in places like short-bleeding and rotting forest. I have watched decaying limbs and flesh slide right off. This battle started long before I arrived to add my body to the heap. An insidious rot has taken hold of corpses in and out of the trench. It smells rancid. Your nose never grows blind to the odor. There aren't enough of us left to move the bodies and also keep our watch. The blasted monsoon doesn't help either. Every corpse I see is bloated and swollen, ready to pop. I look around and the faces I see are still hardened and ready to tackle the next wave of chaos. Where do they draw such resolve? I am fresh meat by their standards. I have only known this hellscape around me for a few weeks, and yet I have never seen such horror. The forces of some plague demon run rampant here. They strike when we are least prepared, and cut down soldiers like a harvest ready to be reaped. They prefer to be close when they tear you apart, or slide you down one of their spears. More awful than the bloody massacre that each day brings is the way they turn those things they choose to infect. Their massive, hulking bodies tower over my brothers and sisters. They mortally wound you first. Then as your lifeblood seeps out and you beg for salvation, they do something. It is hard to describe, but as we fight them, they chant in guttural tones that probe into your head. There are no words, but you feel the promise of ecstasy and blessings if you only succumb to the gifts they bestow upon you. Their blessings are twisted limbs, boils, and pus. It is disgusting. And yet each time they come, the voices take longer to shake. I see the pain on my fellow wounded guardsmen's faces as they are driven to madness by the pain they endure. They are promised unending bliss so long as they allow the rot to capture their minds. Some accept it. From the edge of the trench, through the lens of a scope, I can see their smiles. They beam from ear to ear as their bodies mutate and shake. As blisters form and their eyes burst, they smile. Others I watch deny the embrace of these monsters and the disease. They suffer for their fervor. They writhe and cry out until their throats have swollen shut. From their mouths, black liquid oozes out and sizzles and smokes as it burns their face. I watch on helplessly as they twitch and resist the final stages. Soon you would never know they were once human. They become a mass of flesh with gaping orifices that puff out the spores that spread the rot to every bit of living matter. Not even the trees are safe. They form growths and sprout miserable mewling creatures that ooze pus as they splat on the ground like rotten fruit. How can we possibly defend against what we cannot see? It pushes through our respirators, and even now I know that the same infection that mutilates the dying works within me. Simply pointing a gun and removing the heads of these plague-ridden animals does nothing to stop the rot. Our reinforcement should have long since arrived, yet I am without reprieve. I hold the line with so few, and yet I know my duty and the sacrifices that are asked of me. As the Emperor expects, and my orders command, I will hold the line. Today, my rifle Maria earned her keep. She did as well as she could with my coughing fits. I grow cold and shiver even as the sun above beats down. I weaken. Looking about it, it is painfully obvious that day by day we are less. We are pushed to the brink. Our fight began in the city's outskirts, but their forces are unrelenting and overwhelming. I obey the order to fall back and consolidate at a new line of defense. Soon we will be in the last trench before the bastion itself. I know my time comes short, and all I can think of between waves of enemies is how meaningless my short life has been. Hordes of enemies come, and my commissar calls out targets. I fire, and a head disappears. I fire again, and like a pumpkin, another rotten skull explodes. The horrors seem to stretch into forever, but we hold. For another day, we hold. Soon we'll be counting an hour that we stand alive in this trench as a victory. The Commissar is dead. I have received a field promotion, from Lieutenant to Commissar in a day. This might have been thrilling if my new position changed our fate. All that is different now is my comrades' deaths will be under my orders, their souls bound to mine in death by the bonds of battle. I was just thinking of Commissar Hera. This night is oddly quiet except for the chorus of coughing and retching that I find myself adding to from time to time. I think they mean to watch us vomit ourselves to death. Hera may have known what to do, how to inspire the poor souls in the barracks. She fought and died well. She had this zeal about her, like she could do anything as long as her orders were fulfilled. What's more is the unmatchable courage she had. As she was overwhelmed, she was still barking orders to me. She yelled over the sound of a chainsword ripping through flesh, telling what was still to be done. Monsters didn't even try to turn her. They saw her unflinching resolve to take down as many as she could with her, and I swear some of those things that I used to call comrades had fear in their cloudy, bloodshot eyes. They ran her through from all sides. They left their weapons in her, protruding from all about her. She still remains upright on her feet, the spears propping her up. She never bent the knee, even in death. I command this poor broken regiment now, and I could never hope to live up to Commissar Hera's fervor or bravery. But I can say this. The 43rd Infantry Battalion stands. We shall stand our ground as long as we can. We remain unbowed and upright as the hordes crash over us. The reprieves are less often now. Minutes pass before they attack again. I have had to abandon my dearest Maria. Better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all, I suppose. Some nasty spores got in her, and now she refuses to fire. I retrieved Hera's chainsword when they pulled back the last time. It was stupid, but I figured if by some miracle we live, I could send it to her family. It has become invaluable, though. It is quite effective, even if it is messy. Never thought I would be so close to the bags of pus and live to tell the tale. We number only 43. Funny, right? Maybe that is our lucky number. After falling back to the Bastion's outer defenses, we have turned away as many assaults in this last hour alone as I saw within my first week. I have never been prouder of my fellow Guardsmen than I am now. The enemy's snarls and gurgling grows louder. Another assault comes. The Emperor protects. I have started vomiting blood. It is still within my respirator, which I have tossed aside. It was obviously of no use. My hair pulls out in clumps, and every inch of me itches like a swarm of insects feasted on me. I am better than some, though. Kara's teeth have begun to fall out. That has not diminished her dedication. During the last assault, she spit a tooth into the eye hole of one of the rotten ones. We are still 43. We are a battered and sick 43. But we remain while all others have fallen. I wish we could say we were special, but the Emperor chooses to protect those that serve his will. We are merely his instruments. My life was never meaningless. I see that now. As I stood on the wall of the keep and looked down upon the waves of diseased filth trying to climb up the Bastion's defenses, I took a moment to look behind as well. There I saw men and women of the Imperium, bandaged and bruised. They stood with their armor scuffed and scarred. They stood looking up to me, and at each other. They stood, plague-ridden, covered in filth, and let it be known that by the Emperor they stood as the worst the enemy had to offer flooded over the wall. I watched as they fired fearlessly into the ranks of rotten soldiers, and I burst with pride. For behind me at that moment were no 43 superhuman soldiers that had weapons of mass destruction and bodies of iron. Behind me were people from every corner of the Imperium of man who, like me, before this madness, were assembly workers and janitors. They were husbands, wives, mothers, and fathers, yet they had signed their souls to the defense of the Imperium and its people. It struck me that a soldier did not fight and find purpose because they hated what was in front of them. A soldier fought and died because they loved what was behind them. I have requested an immediate orbital strike on our position. It is lost, but we will fight to the last until the bombs fall, until our final breath. We die how all Guardsmen die, on their feet. Commissar Hera out. Praise the Emperor.
Silas put down the data slate that had been clutched to the scorched guardsman's chest. He wiped away the black soot from the dead man's body armor with a gauntleted hand. The name tag read Lieutenant Varen Staff. He would remember that. He looked out over the disease-ridden landscape. Soldiers, like himself, maneuvered through the bombed fortress in full ventilator suits. Equipped with flamers, they spewed flaming promethium onto anything organic until it was char. The rot pulled away from the heat as the purge continued. An orbital bombardment had laid waste to the clumped army of Scourge that had surrounded the stronghold. Thanks to these few men and women, there had been enough time to evacuate the civilians in the main city miles away. Their sacrifice was one of many, but without it, another planet would have fallen to the rot. Silas took in a deep breath and walked to the edge of the keep's wall. Around and behind him, flames curled, and he imagined the fight that had raged here. The desperate sacrifices. He imagined how Varen must have led in these final days before bombs fell in a desperate attempt to stop the spread. A model member of the Astra Militarum. They would call this a victory. Even now, scribes of the Administratum were entering what happened here into the records. They would of course leave out the names of the billions who died. Human lives were cheap and numerous. Victory. Why is victory the death of strong men and women? Why are victory's results blackened skies and reddened fields? Silas held his traitorous thoughts safely in his mind. He spared Varen one last look before hefting his flamer and joining the line of his brothers pouring fire onto the rotten corpses. Though the Imperium might forget the brave men and women that died here, Silas would not. For as long as Silas lived, he would remember why he fought wars light years from home. He held the image of his mother and father in his mind. He saw his daughter's first steps, his homeworld. Silas knew that when he had held on until the last of his strength, that he must push a final time. Silas, when his time came, like trillions before him in a million endless wars, would die standing.